Everybody, I see the last time I looked, there were 242 screens participating in our Torah service this morning. As I'm sure many of you know, Rabbi Graf is also leading an alternative as well, and I think there's around 100 screens participants with her as well. So it's really wonderful that we've been able to gather together as a Kol Hamet community. And there's a blessing too that we have so many friends who are with us. You know, people have been able to Zoom in who would never have been able to participate in our service before. I want to just acknowledge the Britons who live up in the Washington state area. And I think they're part of a very lovely small conservative synagogue there who I think has made us their high holiday service. So we welcome you with open arms and are so glad you can be part of our high holidays this year. And we have there's family friends who's in Canada, actually. So we are streaming internationally as well today. So that's kind of cool. And I'm enjoying the opportunity to take advantage of some of what this strange, you keep using the word unprecedented, what this unprecedented time has to offer. And so I just want to acknowledge everybody and the blessings. There's some family and friends who could never otherwise be part of our service who are here with us. I don't know if any of my kids are on, but both Naomi and Josh at least hinted at the idea. So if you're there, L'Shana Tova. If you're not there, L'Shana Tova. So what Carol and I wanted to do, as we were talking a little bit, is to kind of invite you into a conversation rather than have a sermon and sort of talk in that way, which we'll do at Yom Kippur, to take an opportunity here just to discuss and sort of sit with what we are reading over Rosh Hashanah. And we really wanted to focus actually on our reading for tomorrow on the story of the binding of Isaac. And when I say that we wanted to focus on that, I asked Carol if she would help me with this conversation, and she was very clear that that was what we were going to do. So then I think I wisely said, that would be great, dear. I'd love to do that with you. So here we are. So Carol, I want to start. We just want to sort of have a conversation that we kind of invite you in, as if you were sort of sitting with us in our living room and our dining room table. Among the things we talk about, of course, is we do talk about Torah and about meaning and Jewish sources. And so Carol, you know, every year we put front and center the story of the binding of Isaac with all of its problematic passages where Abraham is commanded by God to sacrifice his only son for whom he's yearned for years and decades. And my question for you is, why do we read this? Why do we pick this one for Rosh Hashanah?
David and I were talking about this a little bit as we were thinking about David, yes, I have to talk slower. If you were at my dining room table, I'd be talking really quickly. David and I were talking about this a little bit as we were thinking about this conversation. And the thing that struck me was, you know, we're in this time of getting ready for Yom Kippur. We're celebrating the creation of the world, which kind of gives us hope, and we call it Yom Zikaron, like we want to be remembered for good. But then we're entering these 10 days of repentance, waiting to be judged. And I think some of the themes of this time come up in the story, which is, you know, anxiety and issues of trust, and also like, is this God worthy of judging us, and what's going to happen with my hope and what's going to happen with my faith, and do I have faith to go on this journey that's become kind of frightening? I think especially this year that's really resonating with me.
Well, one thing that struck me, and I think this was partly in studying this with my friend Louis Warschauer, is kind of where's Sarah in the story? You know, she's bookended. We have this drama that we just read about today with Sarah and Hagar, where frankly, Sarah doesn't come out so well, and where the motherly role, if you'll excuse me for saying, comes across as so protective and partial to her own child, to really the detriment of Hagar's child Ishmael. And then the next chapter in Genesis is about Sarah's death, and yet she's strangely absent here. So I'm curious, and I ask you this, you know, as a mother, where is she in this, or is she in this?
You know, there's a Midrash that makes it pretty clear that Sarah did not know what was going to happen and was not invited into this ordeal that Abraham's doing, because in the Midrash, Satan comes to her and says, you're looking for your husband and your son. I'll tell you what's going on. And Satan sort of relaying a blow by blow. Now they're going up the mountain. Now they're gathering the wood. You know, now he's binding your son. Now Abraham's getting out the knife. And in that moment, Sarah's so upset and struck by it that she dies. And we read about her death after this story. So clearly she was not part of this narrative at all, according to the Midrash. I think having shown her to be so fiercely protective in the story we read today, I think Abraham completely understood that if Sarah knew what was going on, it would not have happened. I mean, I think about it, like if you came and said, I'm going to take Josh and we're going up the mountain, I'd be like, literally over my dead body, that's not happening. And I think Sarah kind of gets a bad rap. You said she doesn't come across well today. And I see what you're saying. I absolutely see what you're saying. But, having been a mother and also a teacher, every parent is a crazy parent when it comes to their child. And every parent has this protective urge over their child. So I understand Sarah's wanting to be super protective of Isaac. And I also understand, like in this narrative, Abraham realizes she can't be part of this narrative. She couldn't, literally she can't take it. In the Midrash, she is so overcome, even just by the idea of it.
Well, and it also strikes me that there's something here going on about fathers and sons, because, the first narrative, the story of Hagar and Ishmael, happens only or in part because of Abraham's absence from the family dynamic. When Hagar becomes pregnant with Ishmael, she becomes dismissive of Sarah. She became low in her eyes, it says. And so there's this kind of relationship of contempt between these two women. And then it comes to fruition with the birth of Isaac, where suddenly Sarah becomes maybe overly protective, but in part because she's right, that there's a concern about the role that Abraham has been taking as a father. I do think we've seen a change in fathering roles in the last generation, and to be much more engaged and involved in the raising of children. I learned, for example, that my dad actually had not changed a diaper until he changed Josh's diaper. So in other words, while we were growing up, he never did. And that was astounding to me because, first of all, you never would have tolerated that. But it's also just, I think, a change in the way mothers and fathers interact with each other. The other thing that strikes me as tragic about this is as they come down the mountain, there's no more interaction between Abraham and Isaac. Something breaks between them. So maybe Sarah's presence could have been that motherly, the rachamim, the mercy, the compassion that's in a mother is also that quality of love that comes from the womb. And so maybe that would have changed the dynamic in a positive way or let them somehow get through this story.
The other thing I was thinking about as I was reading the Hannah story too is like this theme of what you've prayed for and wanted for this child, and then you have to let that child go somehow. And in Hannah's case, it's not a literal sacrifice of her child, but she takes a child that she's weaned, and they tended to wean their children older, like maybe 3, but she takes this young boy, Na'ar, the little boy was a little boy, and basically gives him to the priest and says, here, I made this promise to God that if I had this son that I'd been longing for, I would then basically give him to God's service. And so I think this theme of the thing we've wanted and prayed for, now we're being asked to let go, sacrifice, turn over, have faith in a very scary world, I think resonates with a lot of parents about what that's like. On the positive side, you talk about Sarah could have been a healing influence. I actually used to watch this really campy show called Xena Warrior Princess. So you can laugh a minute. But one of the stories, one of the episodes dealt with this like totally crazy idea of monotheism. And they have an Abraham and Isaac character in this episode who are talking about monotheism. And Xena realizes that this sacrifice is supposed to happen. And she's trying to stop it. She's trying to save Isaac from what Abraham wants to do. And Isaac, in this case, is being portrayed kind of as a young teenager. There's different midrashim. Like Isaac comes across as very young, but some of the midrash say he's like 30. So not so easily overpowered by a 100, aged father. But anyway, in this episode, finally, Isaac is the one who says to this woman who's been trying to protect him, you're not part of this. You're getting in the way of something like my dad and I need to do, and we need to see this through, and we're going up that mountain, and you stay out of it. So again, thinking about sort of this parental role of Isaac needing to move away maybe from that protectiveness of Sarah and move into, in this reading, in this like idea that he was actually part of it, not a victim, and that he needed to take that journey and face that maybe on his own.
So I've also been thinking, Carol, why do we read this story in general, but why are we reading it, or what does it have to say to us this year? And this has been such a strange year. I think Carol, like many of you know, Carol was using the word unprecedented, an unprecedented amount. And it is a strange and unusual year. But I feel like this story in some ways is precisely the story that we need, because it's a story of uncertainty. You know, what we read today, it all works out. God sort of, if you'll excuse the expression, waves God's magic wand and makes everything be okay. Ishmael, you're going to be a great nation. You know, everything proceeds just fine. But the story that we're going to read tomorrow is much more upsetting. And it's really not clear why everyone's acting the way that they do. Why doesn't Abraham argue with God, which he did just a few chapters previously about Sodom and Gomorrah? Is it because it's a personal matter to him? Is it because he has to test God? Is it because, like Kierkegaard says, he's sort of walking in two universes, one where he's ready to fulfill anything God asks him, and the other where he knows God will stop it in some way, and that those exist simultaneously for him? And so I think for us, there's a hint here of the book of Job coming into our Rosh Hashanah reading, which is really comes out in Yom Kippur. In other words, we don't know the outcomes, and we don't understand always what God's asking of us, and we don't know where we fit in the narrative. And I feel like right now, I walk with so much uncertainty. Things have changed that I never expected. My kids came back home from college for several months, which was complicated, and really good to have them, and really complicated. And now they're back, and I wonder, will schools shut down again? Will they come back? Will we be able to plan things? It's so much uncertainty in our lives right now, and I feel like this story is recalling that uncertainty and telling us that somehow we have to find the way to walk with faith, to journey with God, even when we don't totally understand what's in front of us, even when we're not certain of God's goodness in the world, we still try to walk together, and in that walking, I think there can be something redemptive. And at Yom Kippur, this comes up more and more because the book of Job, I'll just hint this to you all, the book of Job gets quoted more than any other biblical work in the liturgy. But they take little pieces out of context, as if to say, if you want to read this carefully, we understand that the way we walk with God is much more complicated than the Machzor seems to suggest. We don't really know where God is in our lives, and we have great yearning and hope, but there's also great uncertainty. So I wish everybody a quality of being able to walk in that journey, knowing we walk with uncertainty, but knowing even in the uncertainty that we walk together, yachdav, and that we do walk with God, and maybe even God isn't always certain of what's going to happen next in the journey.